Jeffrey Sachs, a distinguished American economist and public policy analyst, delivered a thought-provoking lecture at the prestigious Cambridge Union. This lecture was accompanied by a compelling mini-documentary that delved into the complex background of the Ukraine conflict.
Let me just explain the Ukraine war. This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day.
The documentary, which complemented Sachs' lecture, embarked on a captivating journey through the tumultuous decades from the early 1990s to the present day. This meticulously crafted film featured exclusive interviews and statements from influential world leaders, providing unparalleled insights into pivotal historical geopolitical events.
This started in February 9th, 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, "NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification," basically ending World War II.
Through the lens of these first-hand accounts and expert analysis, the documentary shed light on the intricate web of political, economic, and social factors that have contributed to the Ukraine conflict.
NATO will not automatically exclude any nation from joining. At the same time, no country outside will be allowed to veto expansion.
By examining the complex interactions between key players, including Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and European nations, the documentary offered a nuanced understanding of the conflict's roots and evolution, and they challenged the simplistic narrative often presented by Western media.
The U.S. kept rejecting the basic idea, don't expand NATO to Russia's border in a context where we're putting in goddamn missile systems after breaking a treaty.
Rather than perpetuating a binary perspective of good versus evil or victim versus aggressor, the documentary encourages viewers to consider the intricate web of events, decisions, and motivations that have contributed to the conflict. Here are some thoughts from the experts featured in the documentary. Jeffrey Sachs. First is the NATO expansion. Sachs argues that NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe was a provocative move that led to the Ukraine conflict.
And Clinton was the first agent of this. And the expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. This was probably the most decisive event, never discussed in this context. But what it did was trigger the U.S. putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat to national security by making possible a decapitation strike of missiles that are a few minutes away from Moscow. That is under the category of bullshit, by the way. You don't have your right to put your military bases anywhere you want and expect peace in this world.
Second, the U.S. role. He emphasizes that the U.S. played a significant role in provoking the conflict, particularly through its support for the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution.
So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. A typical U.S. regime change operation, have no doubt about it.
Third is neutrality. Sachs advocates for Ukraine's neutrality, suggesting that it should not join NATO or the EU.
The U.S. was pushing NATO, but the people of Ukraine on the opinion polls didn't even want to be in NATO. They knew that the country is divided between ethnic Ukrainian, ethnic Russian. What do we want with this? We want to stay away from your problems.
From Ivan Kachanovsky, first is the Canadian involvement. Kachanovsky discusses Canada's role in the conflict, including its support for the Ukrainian government and its involvement in NATO's military buildup in Eastern Europe. Second, far-right influence. He highlights that the influence of far-right groups in Ukraine, which he believes has contributed to the conflict.
Far-right played very important role. Even so, they still remain small in terms of numbers. Like before, there were just few thousand members of far-right organizations in Ukraine at the time present on Maidan, but they were very active in violence. This means, as I mentioned, even Zelensky was afraid of far-right.
From Geoffrey Roberts, first is the Russian concerns. Roberts acknowledges that Russia has legitimate concerns about NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe, which has led to increased tensions. Second, negotiated settlement. He emphasizes that the need for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, which would involve concessions from both Ukraine and Russia.
I mean, obviously, my hope is that the war's going to come to an end as soon as possible. That there is going to be some kind of diplomatic breakthrough. That there are going to be negotiations that will bring the war to an end and arrive at some kind of stable peace settlement.
From William Burns, first is the NATO enlargement risk. Burns warns about the risk of NATO enlargement, citing the potential for increased tensions with Russia and the possibility of conflict. Second, diplomatic efforts. He emphasizes the importance of diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict, rather than relying solely on military means. From George Kennan, first is fateful error. Kennan describes NATO enlargement as a fateful error that has inflamed nationalistic and anti-Western sentiments in Russia. Second, new Cold War. He warns that NATO enlargement has led to a new Cold War, which will have far-reaching consequences for international relations. As a professor at Columbia University and former director of the Earth Institute, Jeffrey Sachs has worked extensively on sustainable development and economic development. His expertise provides valuable insight into the geopolitical and economic factors driving the Ukraine conflict.
The generation of politicians running the world right now is not very prudent, very wise, and is not leading us to safety. We're in an extraordinarily dangerous time.
This documentary stands out because it recognizes the truth is complicated. By sharing different viewpoints and historical background, it encourages viewers to think critically and form their own opinion about the conflict. The goal isn't to decide who's right or wrong, but to understand the underlying reasons behind the current situation. I am Lovely Montoya of Manila STV.